Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Mississippi's history. Please leave a comment below with the time and place you are watching this video before we start. We want to know where these documented accounts go and when they do. In the fall of 1903, the once famous Thornhill Plantation outside Natchez, Mississippi, was falling apart. Its white columns were fading against the humid southern sky. The plantation had been around since the early 1800s. But what happened there that October would always cast a shadow over the property and the family name. By 1905, county records show that the name was purposefully removed from local society registries. People in Adams County used to respect the Thornhill name. Jeremiah Thornhill, who came from Virginia with a lot of money and a reputation for being very private about his family, started the plantation in 1837, according to tax records. The original property was over 200 acres of fertile land along the Mississippi River. By 1903, however, most of it had been sold, leaving only the main house and 40 acres around it. What was left was still impressive. A Greek Revival mansion with 6 tall columns, a formal garden that used to be the talk of the town, and a strange family cemetery hidden behind a grove of old live oaks. The story starts with Clara Thornhill, the last living heir to the Thornhill fortune, who came back to the family plantation after being gone for 15 years. The Natchez Examiner Society pages from September 1903 say that Clara's return was unexpected and caused a lot of excitement among people who remembered how bad things were when she left. The newspaper didn't go into detail about these events, which researchers would later find suspiciously common in local records about the Thornhill family. When Clara came back, she was 32 years old and single. She only had one steamer trunk with her. A caretaker named Augustus Barnes had only done a little work on the plantation. His employment records showed that Clara's father, Judge William Thornhill, had hired him shortly before he died in 1901. It's strange that the Natchez Examiner's obituary for the judge was so short, only saying that he died at home after being sick for a while. There was no cause of death listed, and there were no details about the funeral arrangements, which is very unusual for a man of his stature in the community. Eliza Jenkins remembers that Judge Thornhill had become more and more reclusive in his last years. Her grandmother had been a cook at a nearby plantation. My grandmother said the judge stopped going to church or town events around 1899. People would see him at his window now and then, watching the road, as if he were waiting for someone or afraid of someone coming. This story was recorded in an oral history collection at the Adams County Historical Society in 1962. Jenkins went on to say, "My grandmother said the judge wore gloves all the time, even in the summer heat. When she asked him why, he said it was because his hands were sensitive to the sun. But one time, when he was reaching for something, she saw inside his sleeve and said his skin looked strange, like it was too thick in some places. She didn't want to talk about it much because she thought it wasn't right to speak ill of the dead, especially when they were powerful men like Judge Thornhill. The plantation itself was big. According to tax records from 1898, the main house, 3 outbuildings, a carriage house, and about 40 acres of land that had been used to grow cotton but had since been left to grow wild were all on the property. The property had a private family cemetery, which is unusual for a plantation of its size. It was surrounded by a wrought iron fence and was in a grove of live oaks beyond the formal gardens. County land records say that this cemetery was built in 1842 after Jeremiah Thornhill's wife, Elizabeth, died. Jeremiah wrote in a deed addendum that the cemetery grounds were to be kept up forever under certain conditions. For example, no non-family member shall be interred within the boundaries, and no earth from within shall be removed from the premises. The document also said that strange soil amendments should be added every year, but public records never said what these amendments were. In her 1958 study of antebellum Natchez properties, local historian Margaret Wilkins said that the Thornhill Cemetery was different from other cemeteries in a number of ways, not least because of where it is. She wrote, "Most plantation burial grounds were on high ground for practical reasons, but the Thornhill plot was purposely put in a low area with bad drainage. The family also brought in certain types of plants to surround the cemetery that weren't common in Mississippi gardens at the time. Some of these plants are known to need certain types of soil and to be poisonous. According to Augustus Barnes's testimony to the sheriff in November 1903, Clara came back with specific instructions. Barnes said in his testimony, "Miss Clara came back different. She told everyone not to go into the east wing of the house for any reason. She had me nail shut the door that connected the two wings, saying it was for structural reasons, but the wood was as strong as the day it was cut." Barnes, who had been in charge of the property for almost 3 years at that point, also said that the east wing had been the judge's private space in his last years. Barnes said, "The judge wouldn't let cleaning staff in there after 1900. He said he needed complete privacy for his legal work. I sometimes heard him moving furniture around at strange hours, and once or twice I thought I heard him talking to someone. But I never saw him have visitors." Barnes also said that Clara asked to go into her father's study right away and stayed there for 3 days, coming out only for short meals. During this time, she is said to have had Barnes bring her all of her father's letters, ledgers, and journals. Barnes said, "After the 3rd day, I heard glass breaking and found her burning papers in the fireplace, even though it was warm outside. Her hands were covered in ink, and she wouldn't look me in the eye." When asked what papers Clara might have been destroying, Barnes could only say, "The judge kept very detailed records of everything. He had ledgers going back decades, family accounts, letters to relatives back east, and medical journals. He was very strict about keeping track of the family's health, saying it was a duty passed down from his father and grandfather." This mention of family health would later turn out to be important. A partial medical record found in 1959 during the renovation of the office of Drs. James Harrison, who had been the Thornhill family doctor until he died in 1898, shows that Judge William Thornhill had talked to him many times about what was only called the family condition. The record, which is from May 1897, says, "Judge T. consulted regarding progression of family condition. Symptoms advancing as expected for his age, 54. Recommended continued documentation and correspondence with specialists in Boston. Patient expressed concern regarding possible inheritance by daughter C. Requested information on latest research regarding hereditary transmission. Advised that current medical understanding remains limited." What makes this case so scary is how methodical Clara's actions were after that. According to receipts found in the Thornhill accounts, she bought a lot of lime, new locks for several doors, and, strangely, several books on chemistry and soil composition from a bookseller in New Orleans in the weeks after she got there. The receipt, which is dated the 3rd of October 1903, has a note in the margin that says, "Customer insisted on discretion." Clara also bought specialized tools from a scientific supply store in Baltimore. The invoice, which was kept in county records and used in the later investigation, listed items like a high-quality microscope, glass slides and cover slips, specimen jars with airtight seals, and different chemicals like formaldehyde and ethanol. The shipping label said Dr. C. Thornhill, which means that Clara either lied about her credentials or had medical training that wasn't well known. In October of that year, people saw Clara going to the family cemetery a lot. Mary Wilson, whose property bordered the Thornhill estate, wrote a letter to her sister in 1958 during the renovation of the Wilson home. "The Thornhill girl is a strange one. Spends hours by those graves, but doesn't seem to be mourning, more like she's inspecting them. Yesterday I saw her with measuring tools, as if she were surveying the plots. Who measures graves?" Wilson's letter continued. "She's been taking samples of the soil, too. Has little glass vials that she fills, and labels. Once she saw me watching from my porch and gave me the coldest look imaginable, later sent over a note asking that I respect the privacy of her scientific work. Scientific, she calls it. There is something unnatural about a woman poking around in cemetery dirt, scientific or not." Barnes said that Clara had set up what she called a laboratory in one of the upstairs rooms of the main house. He said she had all kinds of equipment sent to her. She had glass tubes and bottles, a microscope, and books piled up all over the place. She told me to bring up a heavy table from the dining room because she needed a sturdy surface to work on. She kept the door locked when she wasn't in there, and I could hear her moving around and talking to herself at all hours. Barnes also said that Clara asked a lot of questions about her father's last illness. She wanted to know everything: when the symptoms started, how they got worse, and who had been with him at the end. She asked if he had said anything strange in his last days. I told her that he had mostly been quiet, but once he woke up suddenly and said, "It's further along than I thought. You'll have to know eventually." I thought he meant Miss Clara, but I couldn't be sure. We know for sure that Clara sent a telegram to Dr. Richard Holloway in Boston on the 28th of October, 1903. She had been living there while she was away from Natchez. The telegram, which was kept in the Holloway family papers that were given to Harvard University in 1943, only had this strange message: "Suspicions confirmed. Father's condition as you feared. Must proceed with utmost caution. Require specialized equipment as discussed. Utmost discretion essential." Dr. Holloway's response, which came the next day, was just as vague. "Proceeding with arrangements. Arriving November 15th with necessary implements. Scientific documentation essential. Have secured private funding for further research. Maintain distance from the matter until then." This mention of private funding raises questions about what exactly Dr. Holloway and Clara were planning to look into and who might have been willing to pay for their research. Records from Massachusetts General Hospital, where Holloway worked until 1899, show that he had been doing research on rare hereditary conditions. He was especially interested in what medical literature of the time called progressive tissue anomalies, which are conditions in which the body's tissues grew in an unusual way over time. In 1898, Holloway wrote a paper for the New England Journal of Medicine about how families change their cells over time. Even though the scientific vocabulary of the time made it hard to understand the details of his research. It's interesting that the paper talked about a well-known Southern family whose male line had shown the same symptoms for 4 generations. Even though the family wasn't named, the time and description make it seem like it was the Thornhills. The record gets stranger and stranger here. The ledger at Patterson's General Store in Natchez shows that Clara bought an unusual mix of things during the first week of November. She bought 6 large glass jars with airtight seals, 20 yards of heavy canvas, a set of surgical-grade scissors, and what is listed as Spec Equipment Boston, which had apparently been shipped to the store for her collection. Thomas Patterson, the store owner, later told investigators that Clara was very different when she came back to Natchez. He said, "She wasn't the same girl who left. She used to be full of life and always smiled at everyone. Now she was intense, like she was working out a complicated problem in her head while she talked to you. She also asked me strange questions, like if I had noticed anything strange about the soil around the Thornhill property, or if crops grew differently there. She said she was doing agricultural research." Later, Augustus Barnes told the sheriff that Clara's behavior got more and more strange during this time. She stopped sleeping at regular times. At night, I'd hear her pacing around the upper floors. During the day, she'd spend hours in the library with old family albums, marking pages with bits of colored thread. One morning, I found her at the kitchen table with all the family silvers spread out in front of her, looking at each piece with a magnifying glass. When I asked if she was looking for something, she said, "Evidence doesn't announce itself, Mr. Barnes. It hides in plain sight." Barnes also said that he found strange notes in Clara's handwriting around the house, like numbers and symbols on pieces of paper that were hidden in books or behind picture frames. "They looked like some kind of math," he said. "Dates with numbers next to them that go back generations." I eventually figured out that they were family birth and death dates, along with notes about age and something called progression rate. Clara's sudden interest in the house's structural details was probably the most worrying thing. Barnes says that she asked for the original architectural plans, which her father had kept in his study. When Barnes told her they couldn't find them, she got angry and started tapping on walls in the east wing, measuring the distance between rooms and paying close attention to the floorboards in some places. Barnes said she became fixated on a certain part of the floor in what had been her mother's sitting room. She kept going back to it and putting her ear to the boards. She asked me if I had ever heard sounds coming from under the house. I told her that all old houses settle and creak, but she just looked at me and said, "What if it isn't the house making those sounds, Mr. Barnes?" Clara also asked if any changes had been made to the house's structure over the years, especially in the east wing. Barnes says that she seemed especially interested in the renovations that were done in 1874 after her grandfather, Ephraim Thornhill, died. Barnes said she found an old journal of her grandfather's. She paid more attention to the walls in the East Wing after reading it. She asked me if I knew anything about a room that might have been closed off during renovations. She said her grandfather's journal mentioned a containment space that had been built for family needs. 5 days before Dr. Holloway was supposed to arrive, something happened on November 10 that would speed things up by a lot. Barnes said in his testimony that he was woken up in the middle of the night by what he called a terrible commotion coming from the East Wing, which Clara had told everyone not to enter. Barnes remembered. There was crashing, like furniture being turned over. Then Miss Clara screamed, not in fear, but in what sounded like victory. Here, she kept yelling. Here it is. Barnes tried to look into it, but he found that Clara had not only unlocked the door that connected the East Wing, but she had also taken it off its hinges. He found Clara kneeling next to a section of removed floorboards in what had once been her mother's sitting room. A lantern was set up to light up what looked like a small hole in the floor. Barnes says that Clara was very excited and had lost her cool, calm demeanor. She looked up at me with wide eyes and her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She said, "My father was very thorough, Mr. Barnes, but not thorough enough. He didn't count on me inheriting his particular attention to detail. There was never an official record that said what Clara found under the floorboards. Barnes only said that there was a box of some kind, and Clara told him to leave right away and stay away from the East Wing. He said that she worked all night and that he could hear hammering and maybe digging coming from the room until dawn." Later, Barnes said that he had listened at the door and heard Clara talking to herself. She kept saying things like, "The progression is further than I thought," and "The structure has completely changed." Then she laughed, but not in a normal way. It was a high, strange laugh. "Father, you've outdone yourself this time," she said. The next day, Clara sent Dr. Holloway a telegram that said, "Discovery made. Situation worse than expected. Come right away. Bring all the tools you need to complete the extraction and documentation." Dr. Holloway seems to have acted faster than ever before. Instead of arriving in Natchez on the 15th as planned, he got there on November 12th, just 2 days after Clara's discovery. He brought a lot of equipment with him in big trunks, but there are no records of what was inside them. Dr. Richard Holloway was a doctor who worked in research pathology at Massachusetts General Hospital, according to the register at the Natchez Hotel. The hospital confirmed that he worked there until 1899, when he started his own practice that focused on what were vaguely called hereditary conditions. What is interesting is that Holloway left the hospital at the same time that a research project he was leading was canceled. This project was only described in hospital records as anomalous tissue studies, according to a short note in the hospital's administrative records, which medical historians accessed in 1952. The project was canceled because of ethical concerns and methodological irregularities. No more details were given, and Holloway's later publications became less frequent and less clear in their descriptions. His credentials seemed perfect, but years later, questions would show strange gaps in his work history. There isn't much information about what happened at Thornhill Plantation over the next 3 days. Barnes, who had been told to stay in the caretaker's cottage and not go near the main house, said he saw lights moving through the rooms at all hours and heard what he called machinery of some kind with a whirring sound working at night. On the morning of November 15th, smoke could be seen coming from the chimney of the East Wing, even though it was a nice day. Barnes says that when he tried to deliver a message that had come for Clara, Dr. Holloway answered the door. His clothes were stained with what looked like dirt and other things that weren't clear. The doctor wouldn't let him in because he said he and Clara were in the middle of a delicate procedure that couldn't be stopped. Barnes said that the doctor looked exhausted yet exhilarated. His eyes looked feverish, and he kept looking back over his shoulder, as if he was afraid to turn his back on whatever was inside for too long. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, "We are on the cusp of a discovery that will overturn everything we thought we knew about human physiology. The Thornhill case will be remembered for centuries." That same evening, Clara and Dr. Holloway were seen by Mary Wilson making multiple trips between the house and the family cemetery. carrying what she described as bundles wrapped in canvas. In her letter to her sister, Wilson wrote, "I cannot imagine what business keeps them in that graveyard after sunset." They carried lanterns and what appeared to be tools for digging. The doctor had some manner of case with him, like those used by physicians for their instruments. They remained there for hours, and when they returned to the house, their clothing was soiled considerably. Wilson further noted, "What troubles me most is not their activities, strange as they are, but the change in their demeanor over the course of the evening. When they first went to the cemetery, they moved with purpose, speaking to one another animatedly. When they emerged some hours later, they were silent, and there was a rigidity to their movements, as if they were forcing themselves to complete their task despite some terrible discovery." On November 16th, something happened that would change the course of events at Thornhill Plantation forever. Sheriff James Whitaker later said that his office got an urgent call from Augustus Barnes shortly after midnight. Barnes said that there were strange sounds and lights at the plantation cemetery that were making him uneasy. Barnes would later say that he had been woken up by what he called a rhythmic sound, like digging, but too regular to be natural. When he looked out toward the cemetery, he saw lantern light moving among the graves and shapes that looked like they were dragging something heavy. Sheriff Whitaker and 2 deputies got to the cemetery around 1:30 a.m. and saw that the gates were open and that digging had recently taken place at several grave sites. According to the sheriff's report, the most troubling thing was the state of Judge William Thornhill's grave. The earth had been taken away and the casket opened. Inside, we found that the remains had been tampered with. Some parts looked like they had been taken out with surgical precision. The report went on to say that there were similar problems at 2 other graves, those of Ephraim Thornhill, Clara's grandfather D. 1874, and Benjamin Thornhill, Clara's great-uncle D. 1868. In both cases, the coffins had been opened and the bodies looked at and partially taken out. The sheriff went straight to the main house, where he found Clara Thornhill and Dr. Holloway in the study. They were surrounded by what was called scientific equipment of an unusual nature, and several specimen jars that the sheriff would only call biological materials. Deputy William Foster's personal journal, which was found among his things after he died in 1921, says that what they saw in that room was hard to put into words. Foster wrote, "The doctor had put the samples in a certain order on the big desk. They looked like tissue samples of some kind, preserved in fluid. What was disturbing was not their nature, which was medical in character, but the progression they seemed to represent. The first appeared normal, but each subsequent sample showed increasing degrees of alteration. The final jar contained something that resembled no human tissue I have ever seen or could imagine. When I asked what it was, Miss Thornhill replied, 'The culmination of the Thornhill legacy.' The official report says that when Clara was confronted, she didn't deny what they were doing. Instead, she tried to explain it away as necessary medical research that was private. She showed what looked like real paperwork that gave the go-ahead to dig up her father's body for scientific research on hereditary disease. However, Sheriff Whitaker said that the paperwork did not have the right county seals and signatures. What happened next was a fight that got out of hand very quickly. Dr. Holloway tried to show that he was the medical expert, but Clara got more and more upset when the sheriff said they should take their research materials as evidence. The sheriff wrote down, "Miss Thornhill's manner changed completely. She was almost frantic in her insistence that their work not be disturbed. When I moved toward one of the specimen jars, she put herself between me and the desk and said, 'You don't understand what's at stake. This goes beyond my father. This concerns generations. Some inheritances cannot simply be buried and forgotten.'" There are more details in Deputy Foster's journal. Miss Thornhill talked at length about a condition that had affected the male line of her family for generations. She said it was progressive and heritable, that it caused changes in the body that science couldn't yet explain. But what was most disturbing was her claim that the condition continued to advance even after death, that the tissues continued to evolve, was the word she used. The doctor supported her claims, showing us notes and drawings that were supposed to show these changes across generations. When the sheriff insisted on looking at their things, Clara is said to have looked at Dr. Holloway and said something that different witnesses heard in different ways. Deputy Samuel Taylor says, "She said, they'll never understand what he was, what we found in the bloodline." But Deputy William Foster says, "She said, they'll never believe what's been growing in our family." There is still disagreement about what happened next. The sheriff's official report says that Dr. Holloway suddenly grabbed one of the specimen jars and tried to leave the room. During the fight, the jar fell and broke, letting the air in. The sheriff's report only talks about biological specimens that posed an immediate health risk, requiring the room to be sealed. Deputy Foster's story is more detailed, but it was never written down in official records. The container broke open when it hit the ground, spilling both the preservative fluid and its contents. What came out was like nothing I had ever seen before. A mass of tissue that seemed to move on its own for several seconds, pulsing and shifting as if it were still alive, even though it had been preserved. Dr. Holloway yelled, "Don't touch it!" And Miss Thornhill quickly tried to cover it with a cloth. The sheriff told everyone to leave the room right away, and then he locked it up. Dr. B. Samuel Patterson, the county health officer, was called in just a few hours after the incident, and the decision was made to put Thornhill Plantation in quarantine. Clara and Dr. Holloway were held in different places. He was in the county jail, and she was at the home of Dr. Samuel Patterson, the health officer. The next day, November 17th, Dr. Patterson looked over the things that were found in the study. According to reports, his report had detailed descriptions of the specimens, but no copies of it are known to still exist. What survives is a short note he sent to the sheriff that is still in the county archives. It says, "Have examined materials from Thornhill Estate, contents consistent with advanced stages of hereditary condition, possibly malignant in nature. Recommend immediate containment and restricted access to property." Over the next few days, Clara Thornhill was questioned a lot, but no formal charges were filed right away. From the few notes we have from these interviews, it seems that she said her actions were necessary for science and her family. Dr. Patterson wrote to a colleague at Tulane Medical School in 1960 when the university's archives were being cataloged. She talked a lot about her father's health in his last years. She talked about progressive symptoms that had apparently affected several generations of Thornhills, always showing up in middle age. Miss Thornhill said that her father had written to her about his symptoms for years, noting changes in his health that were becoming more and more concerning. This letter contains what is probably the only direct quote from Clara that was kept. "I did not desecrate my father's grave. I confirmed what he himself feared. The condition doesn't end with death. It continues. It changes. It adapts. What we observed in his remains proves that the progression continues even after the heart stops beating." Dr. Patterson went on to say, "Miss Thornhill's education is more extensive than I had realized. She studied biology at a women's college in Massachusetts, and then worked as a research assistant to Dr. Holloway at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her understanding of hereditary pathology is sophisticated, if somewhat unorthodox. She speaks of the Thornhill condition not as a disease to be cured, but as an alternative developmental pathway that has been cultivated within the family line for generations." Dr. Patterson wrote a personal note on November 18th that mentioned, "Cultivation. Again, Miss T. made a disturbing statement today about the family cemetery. She said it was deliberately placed and maintained to provide the best conditions for development. When asked what she meant, she would only say that her grandfather chose the location based on soil composition and that specific minerals were added regularly to help the process. What process? She would not say." An unexpected event on November 19th made the investigation more difficult. Dr. Holloway, who had been in the county jail, was found unresponsive in his cell. He died soon after that, and the cause of death was listed as apoplexy. Dr. Patterson's examination did show strange discoloration around the doctor's fingernails and lips, which led to speculation about possible self-poisoning, but this was never confirmed. In Deputy Foster's journal, he wrote, "The doctor's body had strange features that greatly disturbed Dr. Patterson. He wouldn't say what they were, but he insisted that the body be sealed in a lead-lined coffin right away and buried in the county cemetery under a layer of lime. The health department ordered that no autopsy be done. Clara was the only one who could tell them what they had been doing and what they had found after Holloway died. Sheriff Whitaker says that she heard about her coworker's death with unsettling calmness and only said, "He understood the risks. We both did. Some knowledge comes at a price." Dr. Patterson's notes say that Clara became more and more withdrawn after Holloway died. "She doesn't talk much now, but she watches all the time," he wrote. "My wife says that Miss Thornhill spends hours looking at her own hands as if she is looking for something. When asked what she is looking for, she said, 'The beginning. It always starts in the extremities.'" Clara asked Dr. Patterson for permission to go back to the plantation for a short time on November 21st, even though she was still under nominal house arrest there. The sheriff had some doubts, but he let it happen with Deputy Taylor in charge. The next thing that happened would be the most disputed part of the whole case. Deputy Taylor's report says that when Clara got to Thornhill Plantation, she asked to go to her room to get some clothes. While the deputy waited in the hallway, Clara apparently went into the study where their research materials were kept instead of her bedroom. Taylor heard glass breaking and ran into the room to find Clara on purpose breaking the last specimen jars and pouring what looked like kerosene from a lamp on the research papers. "I tried to hold Miss Thornhill back," Taylor wrote, "but she fought with unexpected strength. She kept saying, 'It must be destroyed completely. The evidence cannot survive.' The kerosene lamp fell over during the fight, setting the papers on the desk on fire. The fire spread very quickly, taking over the study and quickly moving to nearby rooms. Deputy Taylor said he tried to pull Clara out of the burning room, but she broke free and ran deeper into the house toward the east wing. The main house was completely on fire by the time more help got there, making it impossible to save anyone. Later, Taylor remembered Clara's last words to him as she drove away. "This ends with me. The Thornhill legacy stops here. It's better to burn than to become what they became." The fire lasted for hours and destroyed Thornhill Plantation. The next day, when the remains were searched, they found human remains that were thought to be Clara Thornhill's. They were found in what used to be the East Wing, specifically in the area beneath the floor where she had found them days before. The official cause of death was death by misadventure, and the case was officially closed on the 3rd of December 1903. The property was fenced off and then sold at auction to pay off debts owed by the estate. In January 1904, Dr. Patterson quit his job as county health officer and moved to New Orleans. He had looked at both the specimens from the Thornhill study and Clara's find under the floorboards, but there is no official record of the latter examination. In a short letter to his successor, he said only, "Regarding the Thornhill matter, I have permanently sealed some files. I suggest they stay that way. Some knowledge is too dangerous to keep. Some conditions are too strange to study." The fire didn't end the story of Clara Thornhill and the plantation's secrets, though. In the years that followed, strange stories began to circulate about the property that had been left behind. In 1907, a group of people who were looking at the land to see if it could be developed said that the soil around the old family cemetery was not normal. Their notes said that the ground looked unusually rich and that plants grew with unnatural vigor in some places, especially around the disturbed grave sites. James Carpenter, the team leader, wrote in his report, "The soil composition defies conventional analysis." Samples contain mineral concentrations unlike anything in surrounding areas, suggesting deliberate augmentation over many years. More disturbing is the behavior of the vegetation. Species that typically compete are growing in strange harmony, and several plants exhibit structural abnormalities with unusual tissue formations that our botanist cannot identify. We recommend against agricultural development of this land. In 1912, workers found what were called anomalous remains near the East Wing's foundation when they tried to clear the land for farming. County health officials were called, and the finds were quickly buried again. There was no official report, but a note in the county health department ledger said that the remains were inconsistent with normal human anatomy and suggested that the area stay undeveloped. Henry Wilson, Mary Wilson's son, owned the land next door and wrote in his private journal that the workers wouldn't go back to the Thornhill land. They said they found something under the ruins that wasn't human or animal, but looked like it was made up of both. The county doctor had everything buried again right away and told the men not to tell anyone what they had seen. Leland, who was one of them, told me in secret that whatever they found looked like it was still growing, even though it had been buried in the fire 15 years earlier. A geological survey done by the state in 1919 found magnetic anomalies all over the old Thornhill property that couldn't be explained by known mineral deposits. The report said that the land couldn't be developed because of unidentified subsoil conditions that might pose health hazards. The most disturbing thing that happened was when the Wilson property next door changed hands in 1928. While fixing up an old storage shed, the new owners found a sealed mason jar hidden under the floorboards. There was something that looked like a journal inside. It was damaged by water but still mostly readable and had the name Clara Thornhill on it. The journal was given to the police in the area, who then sent it to the state for review. The Adams County Sheriff and the Mississippi Department of Public Health wrote to each other and sent the letters to Jackson. They said that the journal had some disturbing observations about a condition that had apparently affected the Thornhill family for generations. Only parts of this journal have been made public. A 1931 internal memo from the Department of Public Health quotes a passage that says, "Father's condition progressed as expected. The changes began in the extremities, just as they did with grandfather, then moved inward." What's remarkable is how the tissue adapts, how it seems almost to develop a separate purpose, a separate hunger. The family trait, as he called it, isn't simply a disease, it's an evolution of some kind. But toward what end? And why does it accelerate after death? Another part of the same memo says, Dr. H confirms my suspicions about the soil composition in the family cemetery. The unusual mineral content seems to speed up the changes. Father chose the spot on purpose, knowing what would happen to the remains over time. He wasn't trying to hide the condition, he was cultivating it. A third passage, which is maybe the most disturbing, says, "I've looked at the family records going back to Jeremiah. Every male in the direct line showed the same pattern, starting around age 40. What starts in the hands and feet slowly moves inward, changing everything it touches." Grandfather's journals say that his father seemed to be becoming something else in the last stages. He writes about tissue that was neither fully human nor separate from the human. Is this why the family was so insistent on private burials? Not out of grief or tradition, but containment? The journal has a lot of technical notes that make it seem like Clara had been studying the condition for years, maybe the whole time she was away from Natchez. She talks a lot about tissue samples and progression rates across generations, saying that each generation showed signs of the condition earlier in life and with more severe symptoms. A passage from the 11th of November, 1903, probably written after she found it under the floorboards, is probably the most chilling. "What I found confirms my worst fears. Father didn't die of the condition. He transformed. What lies beneath the boards isn't dead tissue. It's still changing, still growing, even after 2 years." The structure is unlike anything in medical literature. Not human, not plant, not fungal, but somehow incorporating elements of all three. And it responds to stimuli. When I touched it with a probe, it moved toward the contact. It's aware and hungry. In 1932, the state reportedly sealed the journal and gave it to the federal government. No one knows where it is now, but there are rumors that it was sent to a special research facility for study. In 1934, the Natchez Examiner published a short but strange story. Federal authorities conducted an unspecified operation on the former Thornhill property yesterday. Local residents report seeing men in protective clothing removing several large containers from the area where the family cemetery was once located. No explanation was provided, and the property has now been fenced and posted with no trespassing signs by order of the U.S. Public Health Service. The land where Thornhill Plantation used to be is still empty today. People who live there say that plants grow in a strange way. They're too lush and bright compared to other areas. Unwritten rules among the farmers in the area say that nothing that can be eaten is grown on the property. During a very dry summer in 1958, a strange depression formed in the ground where the family cemetery used to be. This depression showed what looked like a network of root-like structures beneath the soil. County officials quickly filled in the hole and made it hard to get to the area. Elijah Wilson, Mary Wilson's grandson, saw the depression before it was filled. He said, "It wasn't like normal roots. They were too thick and too purposeful in their arrangement. They formed a pattern almost like a circulatory system, connecting all the grave sites, and there was something about the color. Not the brown of normal roots, but a pale, almost flesh-like tone. When the sunlight hit them, they seemed to pulse, just slightly, like they were breathing. In 1964, a geological survey found that the soil on the old Thornhill property was unusual because it had higher than normal levels of some minerals and organic compounds that the surveyors couldn't identify with their equipment. The report said that the area should not be developed for homes because of possible health problems related to the quality of the soil. Dr. Aude Martin Reynolds, who did the survey, later wrote to a colleague at the University of Mississippi, "The soil samples from the Thornhill property defy conventional analysis. They contain organic structures that appear to be neither plant nor animal in origin, yet exhibit characteristics of both. Most disturbing is their response to laboratory conditions. The samples appear to be actively adapting to their environment, restructuring their cellular composition in ways I cannot explain. I've secured the samples in sealed containers, and I'm arranging for their transfer to a better-equipped facility." In 1965, a woman named Margaret Holloway, who was in her 82nd, called the Adams County Historical Society and said she was Dr. Richard Holloway's niece. The society's director wrote down what she said. Her uncle had left her a sealed envelope with instructions to open it 30 years after he died. There was a letter and some pictures in the envelope. The director's notes say that Miss Holloway didn't want to share the actual contents, but she did say that they had to do with her uncle's work with the Thornhill family. She said that the letter told her not to look into the family's condition any further, calling it neither disease nor evolution, but something outside the natural order entirely. When I asked to see the photographs, the director said, she refused, saying her uncle had told her to destroy them after she read his warning. The last official look into the Thornhill case was in 1967, when the building of a new highway made people look at land records in the area again. During this time, a clerk found a sealed envelope in the county archives that said, "Thornhill, Final Observations, 1903. Inside was a single page that looked like it had been ripped out of Dr. Patterson's personal notes and had never been included in any official report. The page, now preserved in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, contains this chilling passage. Having examined the specimens obtained from Judge Thornhill's remains, I am forced to consider possibilities that defy conventional medical understanding. The tissue shows evidence of unprecedented cellular reorganization, as if the very structure of the human body had begun to transform itself according to some alternative blueprint. What Miss Thornhill referred to as the family trait appears to be some manner of biological anomaly, passed through generations, becoming more pronounced with each successive manifestation. Most disturbing is the evidence suggesting that this condition continues to progress after death, albeit along different pathways. The implications are profound and troubling. If Miss Thornhill's research is accurate, the Thornhill bloodline has been incubating something that is neither disease nor normal human development, but something altogether different, a systematic reformation of human tissue toward an end I cannot begin to fathom. I have recommended the permanent sealing of all materials related to this case, not out of scientific caution, but out of genuine concern for public welfare. Some knowledge, once obtained, cannot be contained. Like the condition it documents, it spreads, it influences, it transforms. The Thornhill family's legacy is one that should remain buried, both literally and within our records. The document bears an additional notation, added in a different hand and dated 1932. Related materials transferred to federal custody under Section 22A Protocols. Site to remain under observation indefinitely. During an unusually heavy rainstorm in 1968, part of the old access road to Thornhill Plantation fell apart, revealing what looked like an underground structure that had never been seen before. County officials got there quickly and sealed off the area before local residents could look at it in more detail. Harold Jenkins, who owned the farm next door, said he saw men in official-looking uniforms taking things out of the structure before it was filled in with concrete. They were careful, Jenkins told the local paper in an interview. They used special containers and sealed everything up tight. One of them dropped something that looked like a glass slide, and they acted like it was dangerous. They called in a special team just to clean up that little piece of glass. It made me wonder what they were really dealing with out there. In 1968, Dr. Elizabeth Crane, a researcher at Johns Hopkins University, tried to get records about the Thornhill case for a study on rare hereditary conditions in small groups of people. Many agencies turned down her request, and she says that a federal official came to see her in person and told her to stop asking questions. Dr. Crane wrote to a colleague, "The response to my simple academic question was disproportionate and concerning. Why would a century-old medical case need to be kept so secret?" The official suggested that some historical medical records remain classified due to ongoing public health considerations. When I pressed for clarification, he would only say that some conditions are better left unstudied. The impression I received was that whatever affected the Thornhill family might still be of concern today. There is only a simple historical marker on the former Thornhill property today that says a plantation used to be there. People who live nearby still stay away from the area, especially at night. Some people say they have seen strange growth patterns in the plants, like plants that seem to move without wind or that grow too quickly and with too much purpose. Some people say that there is a smell around the old cemetery that doesn't smell like death, but like something alive and growing that doesn't belong in nature. A botany student from the University of Mississippi took plant samples from the area in 1994 as part of a study on invasive species. Her field notes, which were later taken out of the university's archives and used in a fellow student's thesis, say that the plants showed hybridization between species that normally don't mix and cellular structures that look like they have animal cell traits, including what could be seen as basic nervous tissue. The student stopped her research soon after and left the university for good. When her former advisor got in touch with her, she is said to have said, "Some things aren't meant to be studied. Some growth should be left uncatalogued." In 2001, while workers were expanding the road near the property, they found strange root structures that bled more than sap when they were cut. Work stopped for a short time, and when it started up again, the road had been changed a little bit so that it didn't go through the area at all. What Clara Thornhill found under her family's house in 1903, what she confirmed in her father's grave, and what she ultimately chose to destroy, instead of letting people study these questions, are still unanswered. As Dr. Patterson said, maybe it's best to bury some inheritances and forget about some family traits. But the land doesn't forget. The soil, which has been improved by generations of Thornhills, keeps working slowly and patiently. And sometimes, in the dead of night, people who live nearby swear they can hear sounds coming from the overgrown land where the plantation used to be. It's not the settling of old timber or the sounds of the forest. It's something on purpose, like digging. Longtime resident Thomas Wilson, whose family has owned the neighboring property for generations, put it this way in a 2005 interview with a local historian: "There's something alive on that land that shouldn't be alive." My grandfather told me that when he was a boy, his mother, she would have been Mary Wilson from the original accounts, told him never to play near the Thornhill property. Said the ground there was hungry. As a child, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I think I do. The land there doesn't just grow things, it changes them. Whatever the Thornhills put into that soil, whatever they put into themselves, it's still there, still working, still hungry. Sarah Jenkins, who has lived in the area since before the Civil War, said, "There's a reason nobody's developed that land in over a century. It's not just the rumors or the stories. It's something you feel when you get close to it, a wrongness that raises the hair on your arms. The plants grow too well there, too fast, but they're not right. My father used to say that the Thornhills didn't just live on that land, they became part of it. And whatever was in their blood is now in the soil itself." In 2008, a lot of rain fell in a short amount of time, causing flooding in some parts of Adams County, including the old Thornhill property. After that, county environmental officials tested water samples from the area on a regular basis. The results of these tests were never made public, but an anonymous source within the department later claimed that the samples contained biological anomalies that prompted further investigation by state officials. This source said, "Whatever is in that soil got into the groundwater during the floods. The samples had cellular structures that shouldn't exist, hybrid forms that mix traits of plant, animal, and fungal cells in ways that go against basic biological rules." The official report called them unidentified environmental contaminants, but the scientists were using words like unprecedented and impossible behind closed doors In an interview for the Adams County Historical Society's Oral History Project in 1964, an old person whose grandmother worked on a nearby plantation said, "The Thornhills didn't just build on that land. They became part of it. And whatever was in their blood, it's still there, still growing, still waiting." Researchers looking into the Thornhill family's medical history contacted the last known relative of the family, a distant cousin living in Boston, in 1966. Reports say she wouldn't talk about it, only saying, "Some family traits are best left unexplored." Clara understood that in the end, and that's why she did what she did. The woman, whose name was redacted from the records, reportedly added, "My grandmother told me about the Thornhill men and how they changed as they got older. She said that toward the end, they weren't fully themselves anymore, that something else was growing inside them and taking over. She warned me to never have my own DNA tested, or let doctors study our blood too closely. Some things," she told me, "aren't meant to be under a microscope. Some things grow stronger when they're observed." In 2010, county officials turned down a developer's request for permits to buy the land for a planned residential community, even though the developer offered much more than the market value. The county commission meeting's public records show that the decision was influenced by a private environmental assessment that said the land was not suitable for residential development because of persistent contamination of undetermined origin. Robert Taylor, a commission member whose family had lived in the area for generations, was quoted as saying, "Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. The Thornhill property is one of them. What's in that soil should stay there, contained and forgotten." A graduate student in environmental science from Louisiana State University tried to do soil studies on the property in 2014 as part of her dissertation on how old plantation sites became contaminated. Several agencies turned down her request for access. She wrote in her published dissertation, "Attempts to sample the Thornhill site were unsuccessful due to unexplained restrictions. Informal conversations with local officials suggest the presence of contaminants related to unknown medical research conducted in the early 1900s, possibly involving experimental treatments or unidentified biological materials." The official conclusion of the Clara Thornhill case is that it was a tragic accident caused by mental illness. But for the few who have looked at the incomplete evidence, the partial journal, Dr. Patterson's secret notes, and the strange geological anomalies, the question still stands. What did the Thornhill family pass down from one generation to the next? What grew under the floorboards of that plantation house, in the family's private cemetery, and maybe most disturbing, in their blood? And what is still growing there, in that undeveloped part of Mississippi soil, feeding on an inheritance that Clara Thornhill tried to bury but failed? Dr. James Whittaker, the great-grandson of Sheriff James Whittaker, recently made an observation that is perhaps the most troubling of all. He has had an unofficial interest in the case throughout his career as a pathologist. Modern science gives us new ways to think about what might have happened to the Thornhill family. There are diseases like prion diseases, aggressive cancers, the ability to adapt and evolve, and even parasitic organisms that can change the behavior of their hosts. These are all things that are being studied right now, and they might help explain some of what was seen. But none of them fully explain the reports of activity continuing after death of tissue that stayed alive and kept changing years after it was separated from the body. Whatever happened to the Thornhills could be a biological phenomenon that we don't fully understand yet, he continues. It's not supernatural, but it could be an extreme example of how environmental factors can change human biology over generations. The deliberate cultivation Clara mentioned in her journal suggests that the family may have known about these changes and, for reasons we can't understand, wanted to make them worse instead of stopping them. In his private notes, which he never published but shared with a few trusted colleagues, Dr. Whittaker wrote, "What terrifies me is not the possibility that the Thornhill condition was some unknown disease, but that it might have been a different kind of biological possibility altogether. A divergent evolutionary pathway that, under the right conditions, might have continued beyond what we recognize as human. Clara Thornhill didn't just fear her family's legacy. She feared what it might become if allowed to continue its progression unhindered. And that, perhaps, is why she chose fire as her final solution." The land is still empty. The story came to an end. The records are mostly sealed. But sometimes, when the moon is dark and the night is quiet, Something moves in the ground where the Thornhills used to live and die, and maybe it still does. Something that grows, waits, and remembers what it used to be and what it could still become.